Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and welcome to our approach tutorial for the ILS approach in the iFly Boeing 737 MAX. I have just about paused our simulator over here, since there is quite a bit of theory that we have to talk about before we can commence our approach itself. We're going to start with a couple of basic criteria. When can we arm the approach mode, and what are we going to do when the approach captures? So, ICAO publishes two numbers for an assured capture, or for the reliability of the ILS signals. That is 25 nautical miles for the localizer and 17 nautical miles for the glide slope. Therefore, you should be careful with arming the approach mode when you're outside of these limits. Likewise, many 737 MAX aircraft might be equipped with the integrated approach navigation, and if you activate the approach mode before you're actually receiving any signals from the ILS, then your aircraft might not arm on the ILS mode, but it might arm on the IAN mode, which you can see by glide path instead of glide slope, so GP instead of GS on the vertical FMA, and I believe it's FAC, final approach course, instead of localizer arming. So, be sure that you do receive the ILS, be sure that you have carried out the frisk check and that the correct ident is showing up here before arming the approach mode. Once you're cleared for the ILS approach, we can arm the approach mode, as we are going to do as soon as I will release this pause and continue the flight. Now, when the localizer captures, we are going to set the runway heading, which is going to be 284 in today's case. Now let's talk a little bit about energy management on the approach. We have drawn a 10-mile ring over here, and we have drawn a 5-mile ring. As a small reminder, the 10-mile ring is your indication that over here you must have no more than 200 knots true airspeed, 3,000 feet above the ground for a standard 3-degree approach, and at least flaps 1, normally rather flaps 5. Now, the 737 is a bit of a hawk to slow down on the ILS, and we will see that in a few moments. Therefore, my former operator has established a couple of limits that we can use on the approach, and most namely, those limits are 10 miles out, no more than 200 knots ground speed, 9 miles out, 190, 8 miles, 180, 7 miles, 170, and so on. And you should really try to comply with those limits and not fly much faster than those. This can be a challenge, especially in tailwind conditions. Today we have a good headwind of 16 knots, so it's not that much of an issue. Now, once we're established on the approach, our target is to be on the glide slope with a speed at or slightly above the flaps 5 reference speed, in flaps 5 with the landing gear up. And in that configuration we are going to fly the approach until we reach the inner ring. The inner ring indicates the point where we are going to go gear down flaps 15 and start configuring our aircraft for the final approach. Now, remember, in instrumental meteorological conditions, that is a cloud ceiling close to 1,000 feet or lower, or a flight visibility of 5,000 meters or less, or a combination of any thereof, we need to be stable by the time we pass 1,000 feet. If the ceiling is above 1,000 feet and the visibility more than 5,000 meters, then we need to be stable by 500 feet, and therefore are going to start to lower the landing gear and configure for the final approach at 4 nautical miles. Do note that anything of the stuff before represents a certain operator's standard operating procedure. Other operators might ask you to slow down earlier. However, you will find a lot of inputs on the internet that tell you go gear down flaps 15 when the glide slope comes alive. That is nonsense. When you do that at any busy airport, they're going to scold you and they will turn you off the approach as you simply become an airway brake for anything else that's coming in behind you. So, once we reach the 5 nautical mile point, we'll go gear down, flaps 15, and once our speed is slow enough that we can extend the landing flaps, we're going to go flaps 30, turn the engine start switches into continuous, do another recall check, arm the speed brake, read the landing checklist, land the aircraft. As a small reminder, we currently do not have the taxi light on, since that serves as a reminder for us that the landing clearance has been received. Likewise, the no smoking sign serves as a reminder whether the cabin is secure. And in the stage of the flight where we are at the moment, you should have gotten the signal from the cabin crew that your cabin is secure, and therefore the no smoking sign should be in the on position. So, that much about our general setup over here. Now let's go ahead and turn off the pause and go ahead and fly that approach. So we're cleared for the approach, approach armed, and then we have localizer capture and glide slope capture. So runway heading 284 set, go around altitude 3000 feet, set. Okay, we're closing in on the 10-mile final, so let's go flaps 1. Speed checked. And when flaps 1 is selected, we turn the MCP speed down to the flaps 1 buck. And flaps 1. Okay, flaps 5. Speed checked. Flaps 5. So, we're approaching the 10 nautical mile ring. Remember, we want to be in 3000 feet above the airfield elevation, which we approximately are. We want to have 200 knots true airspeed or less, and at least flaps 1. We're in flaps 5 already. In other words, we're in a nice and safe configuration right now. So, we're now established on the final and descending down. This is normally the point where I, in the real world, would later disconnect the autopilot and fly the approach manually. In the simulator, since you might have quite a bit of workload with all the configuration and everything going on, it is absolutely acceptable to keep the autopilot on for longer. Boeing states that if a manual landing is planned, the autopilot needs to be disconnected latest by 300 feet, but there is a small caveat.
2500.
You can see that I'm only using a single autopilot here and not both. Some operators use both autopilots on all approaches. If you do this and the airplane passes 400 feet radio, it is going to trim significantly nose up. So if that happens and you then disengage the autopilot, you are going to bring yourself into a situation where it will be impossible to do a manual landing and a go-around will be required. So if a manual landing is planned, only use a single autopilot. So we're closing the 5 nautical mile ring. Let's go ahead and work ahead a bit. Start switch is continuous. Speed brake armed. And we can do a recall already. And this way we are now completely prepared. So, approaching the 5 nautical mile ring, let's go gear down, flaps 15. Always match the speed, never forget that. Okay. And since we are below 175 knots, flaps 30. Speed checked. So, since we only have a moderate wind component ahead of us, we are going to fly VREV plus 5, but this would be the point to select your final approach speed that you have previously calculated. So, landing clearance is received, taxi light coming on, and the 1000 foot gate is the top of the white bar on your altimeter. You can see that we are completely stabilized, so I am going to pause the simulator over here once more, so that we can just quickly talk about the stabilized approach gate. When you are passing the stabilized approach gate, remember 1000 feet in IMC, 500 feet in VMC, you need to have the following. You need to be within 1 dot on the localizer and on the glide slope. You need to be on speed within plus 10 or minus 5 knots, but not slower than VREF. You have to have an appropriate vertical speed, which at typical approach speeds for a 737 MAX is around about 750 to 850 feet a minute. You need to be in landing configuration, that is landing gear down, flaps in the landing setting, and the speed brakes armed. And you have to have an appropriate amount of thrust set. Normal thrust settings for the 737 MAX at about 60 tons weight are 49.3% N1 using flaps 30 with a 0.5 degree pitch, and about 52% N1 using flaps 40 with a 0 degree pitch. So, this concludes the approach tutorial. We are going to deal with the landing in a separate dedicated one, so I would like to say thank you very much for watching. Hope that you learned something today. Be sure to leave your like, comment and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell so that you're immediately notified when the landing tutorial is going to come up. Thank you very much for watching. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.